All right, here we are finally. This is Jeff over at Talent Reach, and it's our first LinkedIn Live. And we'll be talking about data driven recruiting for inclusive diversity with Pam Teagarden. I'm super excited to launch this. Hopefully, we can answer whatever questions anybody has and cover a lot of really important data. So, to start off, I'm Jeff. I'm with Talent Reach. I am a sales talent advisor and recruiter. We are a boutique Seattle based recruiting agency here, focusing specifically on sales roles. We have another side of the house that does tech, so contact me if you have any questions, because we typically work with the hiring manager who's either overwhelmed with too many roles to fill, can't find the right people, they're tired of hiring B players. And sometimes it's just a startup who doesn't have the resources and is looking for a partner with a deep bench. So that's us. I'm going to introduce my good friend Pam Teagarden here, and I'm going to let her sort of give you a little bit of the overview. But she is one of the smartest people I know, and I want to make sure that I make clear that my role here is to do my best to glean as much information around the topics of sales, hiring, um, and tech, as well as the deeper channels, especially what like we'll talk about here with diversity and inclusion, bias, and a whole bunch of other things that I'm gonna dig in. So, Pam, welcome to our inaugural show. I'm super glad to have you on.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I would do anything for Jeff, and I appreciate the introduction. You've set the bar high, being so smart as I'm supposed to be.
You have your deep channels. We're gonna definitely talk about it. Pam, talk to me a little bit about your background, real quick. Just sort of set the table, because I know that you've worked in ESG for a long time before it was a popular term. I know that you've got a positive psychology degree. I mean, you have MAPP. Maybe tell me, what is MAPP? What does it stand for? How does it apply to like an HR sort of inclusivity? Tell me a little bit how that all ties together.
Absolutely. MAPP stands for Masters of Applied Positive Psychology, and basically, I started out in banking, so I was very much a business person. I understood the inner workings of business projections and startups and big companies and all of the sort of KPIs or key performance indicators of a business. And then I did my grad studies in psychology, both corporate behavioral and positive psychology. So I have that intersection of business and behaviors. And it just dawned on me that we weren't getting engagement right. We weren't getting, inclusion right. We weren't getting diversity right. And it all seemed backwards and it didn't link to performance. And so that's where how I got to where I am, I suppose. There's deeper rabbit holes, but I don't want to go down them until you need me to.
And you went to work on your psychology degree at Penn, and
Yeah,
where you worked with some of the big names in positive psychology, right? Talk to me a little bit
absolutely.
about sort of that influence.
Well, it was something what I didn't realize, and when I signed up or applied for the master's degree, I don't think I understood that I was going to go through such a personal journey as well as a business journey. Everybody who comes into the master's program is from anywhere. It's not like an MBA where everybody's in business. I had a rabbi and a military, all these various people that were looking to find ways to use positive psychology. So we were lucky to have a real mix of people, from Adam Grant, who you may be aware of from many of his books, and he's a Wharton professor of evidence-based management. Uh, Marty Seligman, who's the founder of positive
Mhm.
psychology. Let's see, gosh. Then there's some adjunct professors and researchers that we used quite a bit that you've probably heard of. But it was just an incredible cocoon of sort of insights that made me a better person. I hope it certainly gave me some resilience skills, and then I want to take that in. I want more than engagement and inclusion and culture in the workplace. I would like wellness, well-being in the workplace, and I think we get caught up in what engagement is. Engagement is not happiness. That's a mood that I could say yes to the happiness, to the engagement survey, and then 10 minutes later I'm mad at my project team. It comes and goes in waves. So what we want is engagement in our work, not engagement at work. So I began to take that learning and parse it into the real sort of linked business performance, where individuals are coming and being smacked in the face with a system. And so that's where I understood that data-based everything needed to happen. And recruiting was obviously the gateway to everything: diversity, a better culture, increasing performance, all of that. So it was a wonderful experience. And I'm happy to talk about how it relates to recruiting.
Well, and you've also not just studied, but you've delivered. So you've worked at some of the highest levels of some of the biggest companies in the world. Um, talk to me a little bit about your professional successes. I think that also maybe touch a little bit on sort of initially when you were in banking, and you had the experience of being able to live in Russia during Perestroika, but obviously you've in terms of the HR function, you've worked at some of the biggest companies in the world. Tell me just 30 seconds about sort of that high level of how that, is applied and some of the things you've been working on.
Well, I think early in my career, I was a banker for a hot second, but obviously the sort of banking terminology and understanding of business stayed with me. But I did go to Russia in the early days of trying to, create capitalism there, and then China, and spent a lot of time in London. So my expat world took away any Joneses I was trying to keep up with. So I didn't say, oh, well, we should use this psychometric tool or that because that's how it's done. I just separated myself from, by accident, I suppose, by being in Russia and living in Siberia. I obviously am not trying to keep up with the whatever the biggest trend is. So I sort of had to think very deeply about what I was going to do and why I was going to do it. So I believe, I suppose, at some of the largest companies, I think what happens is it becomes, instead of recruiting, they recruit to a culture rather than for a culture. And so I began to create a set of, uh, you know, I guess, interventions or recruiting program ideas that would allow people to recruit for the next phase of their business and culture. And for the smaller companies, when I worked in a lot of incubators, I actually set up some in the UK for a while. What you find is they feel like they need another one of those, whoever, John Smith, they need another one of John Smith, when actually you need great mindset diversity in the startup. So you have the fifth person, the sixth person, the seventh person adding something, not, continuing the frame. Because I think that's where we sort of mess up, is we think we need a succession plan that looks like this person, or a business priority that is about recruiting to a culture, and that takes away in diversity. We're all becoming a conforming set of culture ideals.
And I think so. Our title here is, data driven and recruiting for inclusive diversity. There's a bunch of terminology in there. So let's take a couple seconds. Let's break down some of these terms. I
Yeah.
mean, we've got diversity, we've got inclusion, we have bias, we have culture. What's the one? Where do we start? Where is there one that's at the top of the pyramid we should start with, that's most important, and define it? Because I do think that defining what bias means in HR recruiting, culture world. Culture is something that I talk about a lot, where it's very slippery in terms of what it means. How do we define it? How do we take this data? Start with sort of a couple of the definitions and break it down for me.
Yeah, I'll give you three steps of the answer. The first is, we've been playing buzzword bingo for the last, century, I would say. I mean, it's been a long time, where we move from, alignment to engagement to fulfillment to meaningful. We sort of just change the word because we don't get there. And so we think, well, we need to make it deeper, bigger, more humane, more something. So a lot of what I was looking at when I looked as a business person at the HR words, were, so many of these mean the same thing. What's the difference between engagement, culture, and inclusion? if you think about the results, you want the same thing from each of them. You want people to hang around, feel fulfilled in their job, and that they can be themselves. I mean, those sort of really dovetail to each other. So that brought me to the idea of diversity. What is diversity? Do we really want it? Diversity is something that can be difficult for people because you want we sort of are hardwired to stick with our kind, if you will. But we understand that diversity is necessary for business. So the second thing I looked at was diversity as an issue. And what were we doing? We thought of diversity as one of those, two of those, three of those, and when we get there, we will be done. But then we brought in all these diverse, I'll just say, looking people. There's different diversities that are not about your outside presence, but we brought them in and said, okay, go be inclusive, and we tried to sort of lead them to be inclusive, but we weren't really doing anything different. So traditional diversity and inclusion is backwards. We bring in, it's mired in biases, poorly measured, and it's not the right business case. Because in recruiting, the third piece to my point is that in recruiting, when we think about bringing someone in because they look or have a different perspective or came from a different place, when we bring those diverse people in, we that's one aspect of diversity. But if you think about the business case, it's many minds around one solution bring a better answer. Well, we don't know anything about these people's minds. We just know that they match our talent pool or our community. So I think we kind of have to come back up, and to answer your question, the one that sits atop is inclusive diversity. I think we need to make the existing people more inclusive to bring in the diversity less as a token, right? And bias, we can talk about that, but the idea that inclusive diversity is a business strategy, getting many minds around one, a better solution. All the other HR buzzwords sort of stem from that. When we get inclusive diversity right, we have a good culture, we have engagement, et cetera.
So inclusive diversity is as a business strategy. So we
Mhm.
bring in the diversity that we feel like we need, both from an ESG standpoint as well as a company goal standpoint. And inclusivity seems to be that sort of lock and key piece. Was that what I'm hearing? You're saying that they work together. I mean, I know you kind of mentioned they were almost the same thing.
It is. Well, so the reason I flipped it around, diversity and inclusion, feels like we bring in the diversity and we say, go be inclusive. That's a bit more difficult because we have to, you bring in a lot of social justice. We have a lot of racial healing, and we talk about a lot of, violence to certain aspects or ethnic group, all of the various problems, if you will, big problems, world problems. And we bring that in, and that is not something that we can solve inside the organization. So what I kind of flipped it around and put inclusive diversity is because we actually need to understand the mindsets of our current teams, the performance mindsets that are actually making whatever solution we have better, so that when we need that other person, we can bring in the veteran who has one arm, who's from this place, all the intersectionalities, but not because they look like or are from there, because they innovate the way we need them to innovate. So we need the other measures, because otherwise diversity and inclusion is about getting along. We need to get along and get to work better together. So we have to add mindset diversity into our recruiting so that we get the people that look like the talent pool of the community, the next level of the next half of the sky, and all of the things where we don't dumb down our future business, but we need to understand their mindsets and how they fit around the performance requirements of the business. So those two metrics together allow a hiring team to understand that they are already more diverse than they think in the mindsets, and then bring in the person and onboard them because of what they bring, not who they are, if that makes some sense.
I think I'm tracking. It sounds overwhelming.
It is. It's well,
And
it
it's in my world, working with hiring managers, it's overwhelming just to get through resumes.
Yeah.
much less trying to incorporate what is a complex system that you're talking about. What are some of the ways that you've seen this be successful? Because it sounds like you've got not only a front of the funnel challenge, but also, more of a program for bringing out this, these talents and these skills and this call it culture when it's all sort of melded together. And I realize that that's a
Yeah.
slippery
No, it
word, but
is.
what are some of the things that you've seen? Start with some of the big challenges and
Yeah.
some of the solutions that are tangible and actionable, because
Yeah.
not everybody has all the resources to just you know put together a huge program.
Yeah, the reason it sounds complex is because it's nothing like what we've heard in the traditional side of things, right? We have ingrained in our brain from the many times. I mean, if you think about women got the vote 100 years ago, and we don't have women in the boardroom to vote in the businesses now. We have not moved the needle, yet we just changed the buzzword. So actually, what I've done is separate, just clean up all those buzzwords. We'll get the right culture, we'll get engagement when we reach inclusive diversity. So, an example, um, I'm not going to use the name of the firm because, I don't have permission. I just wanted to use this example. I had a private equity firm that actually dealt in the tech industry, and they had a bunch of white middle-aged men who, wanted to be diverse because the tech world was diverse. So they wanted to be diverse as well. Frankly, they all came from two schools. So you really had some people that thought they were not diverse. And I said, well, okay, how are you using the diversity you do have? And they laughed. And I gave them some examples, like, how do you all look at risk? How do all the sort of instinctual patterns that people use, so that I could understand how to organize this team of people that all look alike, a small team, right, around the work that they were doing, to see what was missing. How could they continue to work with their natural strength sets and be themselves, and bring in this other person to do what was missing in their performance, a gap in performance, but also looked and came from and had a different perspective that all of the diverse issues were, so that they were excited to see this person. And it cuts through a lot of the biases, because now we're onboarding them and including them around performance, because that's one thing we all have in common. And then we can get to know each other better, understand this person's background, appreciate them as someone who did a really good thing for this team, and not have to try to do all of the sort of, and believe me, I'm not minimizing these big problems, but we don't have to first do racial healing, or first understand the life of a veteran, or first get what, that will come, and it needs to come. But the first thing is, let's get this diverse person in, after we've let these people that may look just alike understand the diversity that they have. Did that make a little bit of sense? So it's a little bit easier in a sense, because that makes the culture, the engagement, a little bit more streamlined around the
Yeah,
different.
and I think that it still sounds like we need and this may be the answer, right? We may need someone like you to come in and do some of this coaching. Or is the kind of thing where there's, and again, we're going to get to the data driven part of some of this
Sure,
stuff, where
sure.
we can really sort of see some metrics, but is it something that needs to be led by an expert, or is it the type of thing that people can educate themselves on and have success?
I think it doesn't have to be dealt with by an expert, but because we're creating a new paradigm, right? We've all read the books, we've all heard the news stories, we all think we understand diversity and inclusion, and I don't think we understand the insanity of doing the same thing again with a different buzzword, and wanting different results, right?
Hmm.
The needle hasn't moved. So the first case for this is really figure out that the needle hasn't moved, and want to recruit better for diversity and performance at the same time. And once that happens, if you're willing to go there, if you want to uh, push the envelope a little bit, then actually the tactics are not all that different. The way that I measure the performance mindsets looks very much like a psychometric tool, like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC I mean, I'm certified in 30, 40 of them. So I do understand what they do and what they give, but it looks just like that to the end user. The information that comes in is as if you have everybody's brains on business to sort of create the inclusion around their natural strength sets in business. We've never measured business performance mindsets before. So it's really just a sort of a quick a quick study of what that means and relatively the same tactics. Give someone a survey, take that information in, compare it to the hiring team, have a conversation with the hiring manager. You're done. But you have to understand that you're not measuring their personality or their values or their leadership traits. You understand they're measuring their instinctual patterns in business. So you do have to learn the 12 business mindsets. But it's that.
And yeah, let me, like, my head's exploding here. Business performance mindset.
Mhm.
Give me a dumbed down definition.
Well, if you think about what we're doing with any psychometric, you might be familiar with DISC, you might be familiar with Myers-Briggs, you might be familiar with Enneagram, anything, right? What you're doing is you're measuring the psyche of a person against a model. Simple. Personality model, leadership model, communications model, if it's DISC. Um, and so that is creating information for an individual about an individual. But we didn't translate that into business. So when I started looking at all these psychometrics, I thought, this is pretty awesome. I'm learning a lot about myself, but how do I tell Jeff about Pam? And we have these, there's 4 levels of bias that occur in between any groups of people. And the 2 pieces of bias that we talk about are more contextual, more about stereotypes and ways in which we are biased and prejudiced. But we don't talk about performance biases because the way I look at risk and the way you look at risk might be different, but we both need to look at risk in this business. So until you understand both who the person is and how they work, you don't have a full answer of how to bring them into the next phase of business. So realistically, it's just another survey. And just like anything with DISC, there's 4 quadrants. With human synergistics, there's 12 pie pieces in the circumplex. With this one, you take the survey and there's 12 business mindsets. And those business mindsets can be, they're already translated into business. So I can look at this piece of paper, this report that I get, and say, oh, you're more than likely to look at risk this way. And they're more than likely, what kind of innovator are you? What kind of innovator do we need? That sort of thing. And it's really, I want to say it's the same thing. It's just very different. It's another layer of information, if you will. But it's still just
and this is your own assessment. You've created this. It's called Basis.
Yep, it's called Basis.
And I have mine. If we want to take a look at it, if you want to take a quite high level overview of it, so we can look at some of the data that a hiring manager might get to see and why it's different. But talk to me real quick about why is it different? Like as a DISC administrator, and you said there's Myers-Briggs, there's Colby, and there's a million of them out there.
And they're all great.
And you mentioned this in sort of our pre-call. When we assess someone, when we look at a resume for somebody, we're looking at past performance. We're looking at a snapshot in time, and we're not predicting how someone will perform. So if I can say someone make President's Club last 10 years, that's not going to predict. It might help, but it's not going to predict how well they're going to do in the future, especially considering that businesses are different, businesses change, and then I know this is a big one. What happens when there's pressure and stress involved? How do we default back to our most natural abilities or things like that? So talk a little bit about sort of what makes Basis unique compared to, because I think that DISC is great for communications, point of view, and helping sort of understand how to connect with people. And obviously, there's others like you said, Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, and there's tons of them which have a very specific frame up basis for us.
Okay, so if you think about all those other tools, they all have a purpose and they're all great. They all do their purpose really well. And so DISC is communications, human synergistics is about culture and leadership. They all tell you stuff, right? They don't tell you the holistic sense of how this person is going to work in this business with these people and how we can pivot when stress occurs. Because so when you look down at the psychometric tools, you get one report. What we've done with basis is same psychometric information. We've created a psychometric system. And the difference between a psychometric tool and a psychometric system is way too much to get to in the call like this. But what that means is that it's information that can be aggregated and you can look at one person, two people as a working relationship. You need to look at the various levels of the organization about how people work. So let me back up from that and not go down that rabbit hole.
Thank you.
But take the idea of all of the other psychometrics are telling you something about who the person is. A little bit
Mhm.
about how, but broadly how. So a disc tells you, a bit more about your communication style, your the ways in which you'll act, typically, but we all change under pressure and we all are slightly different and need to pivot when we need resilience. So there was something missing in each of those uh, psychometric tools that didn't translate all the way over to business. Remember, I had both sides. So when we made Basis do that, and it wasn't me that started Basis, but my business partner, Andy Pallant, I did the research around how to make it at enterprise level. But we're basically where these are, I'll just be pedantic, these other tools are telling you who the person is and broadly what they might do. We're looking at how they make micro decisions at work every single day, not whether they're good or bad at anything. It's not a sort of a above the norm, below the norm.
Mhm.
It's just, what are your mindsets? So if I know what levers are going on in my head and I can tell you without bias what those levers are, we can have a conversation that's unbiased about our performance. But I can't do that if I'm an extrovert and you're an introvert. We don't really know what that means tomorrow when our client is going to go, out the door if we don't do X or Y with them. So it's as if you need just a little bit more holistic business case for each person. And the way I like to describe it is, instead of knowing who they are and what they do, you know how they make decisions at work. So that how is sort of the ribbon that takes all those other tools that are the who and the what and sort of links everybody around how do we all work together in an unbiased performance model that we can, look at one of us, two of us, four of us, eight of us, 25 of us. Does that make
So
sense?
is it sort of like again, I'll do its best to dumb it down, but for myself, like a predictive, yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Where you have like you know, a predictive model for like a SWOT analysis. We can say, look, it's okay that we're good at things, we're not good at things. It's okay that we figure Jeff will make a decision based on a certain process that we know he's liable to make, especially under pressure. And
Yeah,
therefore, we can sort of say, like a leading indicator, we're likely to work this way together,
absolutely.
and
So
and it takes the pressure out of a situation.
it's like me telling you what I want you to know about me, so you work with me as me, right? I really, really, really want you to know that, but we don't always know. We have blind spots. So what basis tells you, which most psychometrics do, they tell you stuff you probably already knew and a little bit that you didn't know, right?
Hmm.
So when I look at this, and the example for that would be, I worked a lot with private equity funds where we would look at who they were buying, the 8 or 10 leaders that were going to get, $180 million from them or something, right? As soon as you give a company $180 million, you've changed it significantly. They're no longer managing around the table anymore. They have to now open a new office in London. I can predict, knowing how they make decisions and work, how they will respond to the leadership that's going to be remote instead of present. What I'd say is not they will, and this is true. I say they're significantly likely to be open to the way England does things. They're significantly going to try and stick to the vision they have in the United States, right? And when I say something like that, the people know, oh, right, okay, if we used our mindsets the way that we use them, this is the consequence of work. If we use them another way, this is the consequence of work. So when I tell somebody, oh gosh, you're really gonna hang on to the vision in the US, and you say the private equity fund says, oh, we don't want them to do that. We just I just use their other mindsets and say, well, here's how you borrow the behaviors to do that. So when I say predictive, because I know how they make decisions, I can give them some information about how they will work forward, as well as some pivots they can make in this moment, that moment, and another moment, and come back to themselves afterwards. So I can kind of, because business is a system and people have free will, I'm kind of saying significant and slightly likely to do these
Hmm.
things, but
Hmm.
business is just business. So I can predict a little bit of what might happen and is pretty likely to happen, and give them the tools to not let the bad side happen, but to keep the good side, and give them exactly the tool they need for their mindsets to move forward through that crisis.
And once again, it's start getting that territory of, oh my
Crazy.
God, I need somebody to do this for me. So, and I know that you, as anybody who does any assessment has an implementer or an administrator.
Right.
What does that look like? Like what's the thing that a hiring manager or a team who brings on new staff, what's the thing that they get to solve for? How much of you or administrator do they need with an assessment to then be able to have this level of communication with one another?
Right, right. One of the difficulties in explaining it an arena like this is it's better explained around your business, right? Because then I can say the thing your business needs and look at your people and we can see it and it makes sense because it's hitting you personally. It's a bit harder to say in the sort of theoretical terms for anyone that's listening. But what would happen is in the early days of this and up till about now, I would come in and explain how the system, how the basis survey serves your company in recruiting, in the hiring team, and in retention, in engagement culture, all of the things that are the other buzzwords, how we can do, and you tell me what is the most important thing in your business. When we're talking about recruiting, and this is what this topic is, we would create a recruiting program that brought in diverse candidates that could be included well. Remember my wellness in business. And that's going to be proper inclusion, and that's going to be a good culture, and that's going to be better engagement. So I would map out how your business would do that. What I'm about to do is create an app that will allow people to have a sense of it and learn, almost gamified, how to do this survey. And you can plug and play into your Taleo system or your whatever ATS applicant tracking system you have, or you can just bring in a consultant, one of my people to do that. But my hope is that I'll move away from having to have a consultant come in, and
Mhm.
more of a uh, sort of a mastermind group of the recruiting person, so that they can use the app and understand the information. Because truly, once you learn the 12 definitions, you then can start to use that language and understand how you can play that model in different places of your organization. 12 definitions.
So it's an approachable assessment. It's not so complex that everybody's just because again with the amount of work that people have on their plates already,
Oh, of course.
getting.
Absolutely. The complexity is in the theory.
Mhm.
Once you learn the 12 mindsets and you understand from one or two examples how that fits your recruiting program, the two things fall away that have been causing recruiting the most trouble. One is that most of the recruiting uh, data is past or a lagging indicator. If I get a woman in to a tech company that doesn't have women, that's not a predictive indicator. That's today I've got that woman. And it's now a lagging indicator. Or it's an idealistic indicator, like I want to know what their values are, their culture values. And with an idealistic value, if you use tools, or an idealistic sense of them understanding their communication style and using it well, uh, with the past performance stuff, you really don't have anything about the current reality and the next phase of business. So what I what I tend to think about is that I'm actually making the job of any person a little bit easier. Not necessarily, sorry, I shouldn't say that, simpler. Sometimes easy is not, sometimes it's
Sure.
hard to find the diversity, et cetera. So what tends to happen is people say, oh my God, we have survey fatigue. We already do that. We have had many tries on this, and the leaders hate the diversity conversation again. And I say, look, this may sound counterintuitive, but if we slip this in, then what happens is the right things stay, the right tools and elements stay, and you begin to sort of uh, clean up some of the data that is hurting us. So if you think of psychometric tools like a roadmap, basis is more like a GPS, right? So you're putting a lot of data in, and you can run the business. The people can run the business. The people's mindsets can run the business instead of the business pushing the
Hmm.
people into the
That's
culture.
interesting. That's
And so
interesting.
it's what people want. It's just that the theory is so. Remember, I said it's backwards. So now I'm challenging you to say your baby is ugly, and that kind of sucks. But once you get in and learn the 12 definitions, and either I spend time with you or someone in my company spends time with you to learn to use them once, twice, three times, and you're ready, or the app will come on and give you the piecemeal learning along the way.
So a couple things, and then maybe we'll take a look at some of these elements. One is when you bring this into a group of whatever size, what does adoption look like? Are people excited for it? Do they buy into it, or are there some hostages? Is it talk to me a little bit about sort of what when the rubber hits the road, what really happens whenever people see this?
Right, right. And let me think about recruiting in particular. Um, Normally, what I will do is try to find a small way in so that the person in the contact of the client can understand it before we go further into the company, right? So the 12 definitions, I'm not saying, it makes it simpler, and they need to let it resonate, and they need to understand um, just well enough to sort of know left or right, as we move forward, right? So what tends to happen in the recruiting field is, as I say, look, obviously this is going to be a survey. It's going to take some time, for the candidate to do it, and it's not attached to your ATS yet, and you haven't like let your other recruiters understand it yet. So let's think about the biggest recruiting need right now. Is it the CFO? And we need to utilize it for that one open position, or is it staff engineers, and we need to sort of use it to sort of vet out the ones that won't fit into our team structure, or so everyone will fit into the team structure, but who will fit better into the team structure for the next phase of our business. So depending upon where you start, I try to give the people that are bringing it in, my client contact or my client team, I try to give them enough rope to learn and not hang themselves. Now, how will that look when I use it with an app and somebody takes it on and brings it into their whole organization? They may take it piece by piece by piece and use it just for recruiting and not for anything else, and then they'll use it for they'll continue to use it differently. But that is something I'm going to stay very close to until the app is ready. But
Well,
it's
and whenever for example, whenever I would do a disc assessment with a team of people, there was generally widespread adoption. Oh, okay,
Mhm.
I see that. A lot of times it reinforced what people already knew. A lot of times there was some things that were uncovered, like you said, and there were a few times where it was like, well, I don't really buy into
Yeah.
that. But what I found was unless there was reinforcement along the way, people fall back to their regular habits. Do you find that with basis there's an adoption level that's a little bit higher because it's more integrated in the ongoing workings of the business?
Yeah. So the two pieces of that make it more adopted, I guess that's the word I want to use. If you think of a psychometric, it's easy to understand this piece of paper that says I'm an extrovert or a dominant influencer or whatever it says, but it's hard to translate that into business. Now, take it basis. it's already translated into business, but because it has a more dynamic sort of set of answers, these are your blind spots, this is how you react under pressure. It is actually a little bit more situational than it is about the person. I mean, it's about the person, but it actually can describe you in a variety of situations, at your best, under pressure, with this person differently than that person, in this situation differently than that team. And so you do take a little bit longer to understand, but not the 12 definitions, but just understand how to use them, how to understand. It's kind of like the volume of a stereo where, the you have the dominant mindsets and the not as dominant mindsets. And you need to understand them, and the sort of ways in which that serves you, and the places you need to make particular pivots you can predict. When you do that, it takes about 3 touch points.
Hmm.
And so I usually make sure that either someone from my company and the client contact do an awareness based, here's your answers. And then we do a second take on it, which is working relationships. So we piece people together, how they work, this person, these 2 work together, these 5 work together, those 3. And then we look at the culture of the team. Once we do that, they've heard the 12 definitions in 3 different ways, right? They've the same 12 same, we're treating the team like one big individual, right? But it's like they're now telling me, by the 3rd touch point, they're now telling me what they see. And then they start to use it as a feedback language. That's the
Mm.
important part for the adoption.
Oh,
Because if you bring in a recruit that's diverse and you onboard them with basis, then they're learning how they innovate under pressure, how they need to pivot with this team, how they need to work with their boss, with this person, with that person, with the whole team. That's the onboarding. So you've personalized the onboarding, and you've brought them in to the performance already inclusively. Now the feedback language is less personal, like dagger stab, right? It's like, oh yeah, listen, we need you over here and you over there, and we need to, because we're dealing with your greatest, you're not supposed to do everything. You're supposed to be you. And
mhm.
when all of us are missing some aspect of the business and the mindset that doesn't exist in all of us, we need to band together and do a team-based kind of way to struggle through that. And no one is, it's your fault because you're bad at
Right,
this.
right.
We aren't the kind of, think about accounting people who need to be innovative in this world. They need specific tools to be innovative. They're not just going to jump out and, brainstorm the craziest idea, because they're a little bit more accountable and visioned and, set in their ways of accounting. Or I'll just say regulated. Then, but you can do anything if you do it the right way. Instead of saying everyone needs to now be more innovative, you've just asked them to be something that they're not.
Mm.
So it actually, the adoption comes when you start to use it as a feedback language after, 2 or 3 touch points of learning the 12 definitions in a variety of perspectives.
Okay, cool. And let's look at some of the specifics here in a second. But the last little piece about this is when companies are successful at this, and whether it's using Basis or they're successful, because obviously there are successful companies out there, right? It's not like
Yeah. Oh
we're
yeah.
here to save everybody. What do they say? What are some of the things that people say down the road, a year or 2 years at IPO or what are some of the things that they say happen?
Uh, one of the testimonials I got from a startup company, well, actually a little beyond startup, was, "Man, I wish I had this information before," because it feels like we're in this, war, but you've given us a bulletproof vest. We can actually muddle through this even under pressure. Another company said, "Oh my gosh, we are going to put away all of our." This was after some years of using Basis. It was a pharmaceutical company in the UK, and they said, "You know what? We're going to just disband HR. We're not going to fire anybody. You're going to come to the middle, and your job is to say yes to the people." They understood. They could look at the
Wow.
mindset of the people and understand that if you needed a cell phone and you weren't a manager, because the policy said you can't have a cell phone until you're a manager, you just need to, how do I say yes to you? And it began to be the people driving the business. The other one that really strikes me is, we had a medical consortium in the United States that needed to be innovative because the Obamacare money was coming in, and they had to, divvy it up between the oncology and pediatrics and all of that. But they were very, very headstrong doctors. They're running a cardiology practice and an oncology practice in it, right? So they were like, "Oh, we have to become innovative." And I was like, "No, you don't. You need to be in it. I don't want you to be super innovative when you're doing surgery on my heart. You need to be innovative in this situation, not that situation. No, I shouldn't say not innovative, but not overly innovative. I want you to follow the rules that and the prognosis that I have when I'm in surgery." So when they realized that they just needed to pivot, and I gave them the right tool for their mindsets, they did it what they were trying to do in 6 months in 12 minutes. And they thought they were going to have to hire in another doctor or another administrator that could be the innovative person. And they just didn't realize that they could do it their way.
Hmm.
And that meant that they could focus their recruiting platform not on trying to find this one person that could innovate, but actually to find the diversity that they were looking at, because they wanted to open a medical school and needed more women, more people of color. And they could focus on their future needs versus something that they didn't know they didn't know, right, about
Well, and
themselves.
talking about bias, we've been told. I was reading this great article yesterday about how for decades now we've been told that we must all be the Steve Jobs of the world. We must all be innovators and geniuses and visionaries. And I think now's a good time to I can bring up the assessment that I've taken, and it's eye opening because when you realize where you're best, that we don't need to be all the superstar but we've been told that's so often. Like I've worked with people who are engineers, and they've
Yeah,
started companies, they've started wonderful, like you know software products that really are perfect for the marketplace. Getting past that idea that, oh, now I've got to shift gears and be someone I'm not, because otherwise I'm not taken seriously.
absolutely.
Let me pull this up and let me see. Does that take up? Let me see if I can get you into
Yeah,
the.
yeah. Oh gosh, that's an old cover. Ooh.
I know, and so
Oh,
let's see.
gosh, that's funny. That was way back when, but I'm happy to see it. One of the
Um,
things that I'll say while you're pulling this up is that the reason that we all think we need to be Steve Jobs, et cetera, is because we were told, because remember, all of the information we get is idealistic. And if something's idealistic, you aspire to become that. I'd rather you inspire business out of you now and recognize who you need beside you and how you need to pivot, and, the kind of decisions you'll make, and then be you now. So
mhm.
I think that's a very intricate point, because we've lost the ability to, um, I guess, what was it? Viktor Frankl said, we need to think about what we want to do before we act. We can't do that these days. So this does that. This tells you how you're going to do it before you act. So,
That's maybe a little bit easier to read. So,
yeah.
um, I'm not sure I can zoom in to this. So, talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing here, and let me know if you want me to move forward or backwards.
Sure. Well, I think I won't go into the definitions of the mindsets because that could take a while. But what I want you to look at is just the general thing, like the volume on a stereo, right? So, or on a audio. Now I can't say the equalizer on a stereo anymore. But if you think about it, business is a system. That's all it is. It needs 100% of every one of these mindsets. So people always ask me, what's the right answer for basis? Well, the right answer would be 24. You would score a 24 on every single one of these, and it
Is
would
the
just
maximum
cover
24 over here to the right?
all the way to
Okay,
the right. It goes from a low of, I think this one cuts off at 4. No one has 0, and no one has all 24s.
right.
Everyone has some combination of the 12 mindsets. And what I want people to understand is that is just great. You have the perfect basis profile. Now, let me talk about when you're working great and when you stand in your own way. And I'm going to give you some tips so that you won't do that. So I could make you someone who could work perfectly if you apply this well in every situation. So at least you'll know what you did wrong if you don't apply it well. So the first place you look is which ones are the most dominant, and you find that the second blue and the bottom yellow. So those are the mindsets that you're going to use all the time, right? I can expect you to use those mindsets, and then as they go down, sort of cascade down from the toward the left, then those are the next dominant, and you'll notice that you have a everyone has a less dominant or a couple of less dominant mindsets. And everybody say, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible. I hate it that my actualization, or what, and that has a particular definition and basis. I hate it that that's so low." No, don't hate it that it's low, because what that means is the extent to which you feel you are actualized in the processes you're taking it on. It doesn't mean self-esteem. It doesn't mean anything. It just means, what is your story? What is it that makes you feel like there's more to learn about what will be, who you'll be in the future of business? And you tell me the story, and we talk through the mindsets. But what I tend to tell people is, if you think about pressure rising, it rises from the left to the right. And as you move toward because time is going too slowly, or some yucky person joins my team, pressure rises. Every single person's intact profile fractures at a point of pressure. And you need to know what pressure feels like so you can regroup and come back as you. So you can actually tell your leader how you need to be led in business language. You can say, "This is what really does make it hard for me to work within this team. How can we pivot me and the team to get me and everyone else around their lowest strengths, lowest dimensions?" And so I know that didn't make a ton of sense, but I think what people learn from this is their most dominant mindsets are the ones that you can absolutely count on. And the lowest mindsets are something you need to take on as a person to realize that is what I lose, and how different I become as pressure rises. What am I going to do about it with the strengths and dimensions that I still have available to me, the ones that are still dominant after I reach the pressure point of 13, 14, 15 for years?
Interesting. And so these elements, these mindsets, are consistent across everyone's
Yes, these
assessment.
are 12 mindsets that in combination mean that you can build a business from soup to nuts. So in combination, they mean something very different. So
Well,
every
but hang
mindset.
on, before you jump into the specifics and combinations, I think it's really, really cool. Talk to me. If I go to the next slide, you can see there's these larger super groups
Yeah, yeah,
that they're made up of. So if I go back, like there's the blue and the green and the yellow, and there's different bars in there.
yeah,
When we look at the super groups, talk to me a little bit about sort of how
yeah.
it seems, and maybe I'm wrong. Talk to me. It seems like a simpler on ramp, and a sort of a heuristic that allows us to say, oh, great, I can categorize someone here. I know that in this case Jeff is lower focus. There's no secret there to anybody who knows me, but talk to me a little bit about that before we dig into the
Oh,
big.
it's great. No, this is perfect because everybody needs an elevator pitch. You need to know, when you do a Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFP. What are you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not going to go through all 12 definitions. So if you think about the 12 uh, volume of mindsets that you have in your brain, they equal a business sort of style, right? And if you take the blue as sort of an energy of an entrepreneur, just like, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to go fast, and I'm going to take it to the bank and get it, and we're going to do this, and I have a great idea. And then the green is more exploratory, so everyone has all three of these. So you are more entrepreneurial than you are exploratory, than you are focused. That's great. You're not no focus. You're not no exploratory. You're not no energy. So what you need to know is somebody who's high yellow is going to be focused. You might want to look for your opposite, despite what they look like, because that person can bring the focus that you don't want to do, because you love being an entrepreneur. I know you well enough to know that you love being an entrepreneur, and you got a great idea, even when that idea is still working on being implemented. And you'll explore for a minute, but you got another idea. You'll explore for a minute and got another idea. And so if you know that about yourself, then you start to bring in the person. If you need more innovation around this one idea, let me bring in an innovative person to do that. So with startups, it's very easy to see how I can round out the team so that the shape of the business has all of the qualities of business styles, right? Because a business needs ideas and exploration
Mm-hmm.
and the risk and reward and focus. And so since you have all of that, you're going to use them in this volume. Someone else uses them in another volume. You just need to learn how to talk to that person, right? It's an unbiased representation
Well,
of,
yeah, you were talking about, bringing people in,
yeah,
that are there. It's inclusive. It seems like this is a way to actually,
measure it.
because if I got this right, because you're building a team for who they're going to be or
Yeah,
predicted,
absolutely.
therefore we can pick someone who might need some more yellow or some more green, and then talk about some of the specifics underneath here. But also because it's without bias, we are able to say, okay, great, Jeff is terrible at XYZ. That's
Not
okay. It's
not terrible at. You just don't use those mindsets as often as the other ones. It doesn't
sure,
mean you're good or
sure.
bad at something. It just means
Okay,
you're the extent to
that's all
which you
pretty
use
nice.
that muscle, like at the gym.
Okay,
I don't do arm exercises. I do leg exercises,
right.
and I stop because my arms get tired and I put it down. That's what we're saying. We're just saying the extent to which you use that mindset, you'd rather use the other ones. And so you can measure certainly diversity this way, but let me give you two examples. A startup, I can say, Jeff, you are the entrepreneur. I need to give you a focus person. Do you know how hard it is to recruit somebody that is your opposite? Very hard. So that's why this is really helpful in the recruiting side of that.
Mm,
Then I can say, oh, you're getting to a stage where you need some exploration, and you start to piece together the roles and mindsets of everyone. You could also bring in women and people of color and all the various diversity groups at the same time, but your business is not at risk because you're bringing those people in. You don't have to become better at understanding the community that they come from until we do that as a separate part of inclusion. But right now we're talking about performance. When you're at a larger company, the company has a particular shape. I think I used accounting, for example. I've worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers some. And what'll happen is they need to be very focused, right? They're tax and audit and
hmm
consulting, and say they do not want a whole lot of blue and green. But what they might need is in this team a little bit more green and a little bit more blue that doesn't actually change the shape of the team, right? So the team still veers toward yellow with a couple of different people that have different roles and are allowed to keep their roles, their mindsets, right?
hmm
So I didn't make everybody be the culture poster on the wall. I actually explained to this person, you're different and we need you. Your mindsets are different. And here's how we're going to craft your job to bring those mindsets into the company without messing up the company, right? Because we do need more focus. And it could be that the startup gets to a point where, because of the industry that they're in, they need to always be exploratory. Take Amazon. They had an e-commerce site that sold books, but now they're selling baby food and blah blah. So they're just keeping on with the exploration. But an engineering firm needs more focus. So you need to start up with the right mindsets to run the whole business, but you might see one of those or two of those kind of crop up in the shape of the total business.
Awesome. Okay, so we're running up against time, so, and I know we could talk about some of the specific details and how this one bar compared to
Mm,
this one bar is going to be a predictor of certain things, and maybe we'll get a chance to spend a whole hour talking about some of the
no way.
specifics. But it really is very applicable to how we can use data for all this inclusive diversity, especially in hiring. Take the last couple of minutes and tell me a little bit of where you think you know hiring, especially in like recruiting. I don't know how much you've worked with sales, but like my world, sales, tech, recruiting. Where is it going? Like where the last couple of years have shaken things up dramatically.
Oh, huge.
The
Yeah.
conversations that we have in our industry are different. Hiring managers are moving more slowly, especially at larger companies. Talk to me a little bit of sort of where they should be setting their sights?
I think there's too many open positions per recruiter in so many companies. I think recruiters get blamed for the lack of diversity because they, even if they brought it all in and that those people didn't stay, I think that there's just a lot that comes onto the shoulders of a recruiter. Now, sales is interesting because sales is very translatable to performance. But if you think about sales, that might be an easier fit for the next level of performance. We need more of them and they need to be able to sell this kind of product. But here's the thing. No other psychometric tool is going to give you literal information about how they fit, not just the performance of their role, but the working relationships they need in the larger community of that workplace. So you're going to have the account manager reps that are going to be dealing with that salesperson. You're going to have this type of client. You're going to want diverse salespeople that are still the kind of salespeople that you need. So this actually unites everybody around their performance mindsets and the shape of the company. It tells them how to work within the company and how the company will increase toward, competitive advantage. So it's a very useful tool to recruit and onboard holistically, not just because they're a salesperson and these are the bullet points under their role description, but actually what that person is going to do and who they need to do it with and how those outcomes need to help the company increase its revenue or grow with other people. So the culture begets culture. I don't like to do anything with regard to recruiting to a culture. I'd like for there to be constructive conflict instead of collaboration, which I think tends to tell people that we just all need to do this together. I like that. I want people to stand up as they are, work as they are, and realize those relationships when they come into the team and holistically understand how to build the business, not just their role. So recruiting as a gatekeeper, and I would like to see something measures like basis allow the retention to be greater, onboarding to be simpler, more translatable to business success, and diversity to actually stay.
Yeah. Retention, especially now, is obviously a huge challenge, and we'll add that to our next conversation. But I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much for sharing. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do so?
Uh, Pamela@authentum.com. If you want to reach me, please do. And I look forward to explaining more about what you didn't understand if I went over something too quickly. But by and large, I think recruiting is just a place where business can be changed for the better, and I'd love to make it simpler.
Excellent. Thanks, Pam. Have a great rest of the week.
Take care. Good to see you, Jeff.
Thanks, everybody. We'll
Bye-bye.
be back again in hopefully another week or two, depending on our success here. So let us know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.